My name is Emily, and I'm 33. Picture this, a warm Ohio dining room, Thanksgiving, 2024, filled with the glow of candles and the smell of roasted turkey. My family's laughing, passing mashed potatoes, and I'm clutching my wine glass, hoping to feel at home. Then my sister Sarah stands, clinks her glass, and says, "We voted Emily." "You're not family anymore." Cheers erupt. My heart drops, but I force a soft laugh, hiding the sting. Have you ever been blindsided by those you love? Like if you felt that pain, subscribe for stories of finding strength and comment where you're watching from. I stood in the doorway of Mom's dining room, the weight of my pecan pie heavy in my hands. The air was thick with the scent of pumpkin spice and roasted potatoes, and my family's voices overlapped in a familiar hum. I was late, my car having sputtered on the icy roads of our small Ohio town. My chest tightened as I scanned the table. Sarah, my sister, sat at the head, her hair pulled back tight, her smile sharp as she talked about her new job. Nathan, my younger brother, leaned toward my cousin Hannah, whispering something that made her smirk. Mom Diane was fussing over a tray of rolls, her laughter loud but brittle. I took a breath, hoping this night could stitch us back together after months of clipped phone calls and unanswered texts. I set the pie on the counter, the ceramic dish clinking softly. "Sorry I'm late," I said, forcing a grin. "Car trouble." Sarah's eyes flicked to me, cool and distant, like she was sizing up a stranger. "You made it," she said, her tone flat, then turned back to Hannah. My stomach nodded. I'd spent hours baking that pie, remembering how Dad used to sneak bites before dinner. I thought it might soften things, remind us of better days, but Sarah didn't even glance at it. I slid into the empty chair next to Mom, the one with the wobbly leg Dad never fixed. The table was crowded with platters of green bean stuffing and a glistening turkey, but the warmth of the food didn't reach me. Nathan was telling a story about his new apartment, his hands animated. "You should see the view, Hannah," he said, grinning. "City lights for days." Hannah nodded, her eyes darting to me briefly, sharp with something I couldn't place. She'd been clean for a year or so, Mom said, but tonight she looked jittery, her fingers tapping the table. "Sounds amazing," I said, trying to join in. "You settling in?" "Okay." Nathan's grin faded, and he shrugged. "Yeah, it's fine." The conversation lurched, like I'd stepped on a crack in the floor. Mom cut in, her voice bright. "Sarah's killing it at work, you know. Got a corner office and everything." She beamed at Sarah, who leaned back, basking in it. "Just closed a big deal," Sarah said, sipping her wine. "They're talking promotion already." "That's awesome," I said, my throat tight. I wanted to share something, anything to feel part of this. "I've been freelancing a bit. I started since the layoff. It's tough, but I'm pitching some new clients." Mom's smile flickered, and she reached for the gravy. "That's nice, honey," she said, her eyes on the table. Silence fell heavy as the snow outside. I felt like I was shouting into a void. I glanced at Sarah, hoping for a spark of the sister who used to braid my hair and sneak me cookies. Instead, I saw a stack of envelopes under her napkin, their edges worn, my teenage handwriting faint but unmistakable. Letters I'd written her when I left for college, pouring out my dreams and fears. Why were they here out in the open? My pulse quickened. I opened my mouth to ask, but Hannah leaned forward, her voice low. "Heard you've been busy, Emily," she said, her words clipped. "Real busy." Her eyes held a challenge, like she knew something I didn't. "Busy?" I laughed, trying to keep it light. "Just trying to keep the lights on." Hannah's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Nathan snorted, and Sarah's gaze stayed fixed on her plate. Mom started talking about the weather, her voice too loud, and I sank back in my chair. Something was wrong, sharper than the usual family tension. I thought of Sarah's text from last week. "We need to talk at dinner." I'd assumed it was about Mom's health or Nathan's debts. But now, with every sidelong glance and forced laugh, I felt a chill. The pie sat untouched, and so did I, a guest in my own family's home. The chatter around the table picked up again, but it felt like a wall had gone up with me on the wrong side. I poked at the green beans on my plate, the fork scraping too loud in my ears. Sarah was now talking about her new car, some sleek thing she'd leased to celebrate her promotion. "Drives like a dream," she said, her voice bright, as if she hadn't just frozen me out. Nathan nodded along, tossing in details about horsepower, while Hannah kept her eyes on me, her fingers still drumming. I wanted to crawl under the table, but I forced myself to sit straight, to act like I belonged. I turned to Mom, hoping for an anchor. "How's the garden doing?" I asked, picturing the rose bushes she'd tended since I was a kid. She blinked like I'd startled her, then gave a small smile. "Oh, you know, same old. Weeds keep coming back." Her voice trailed off, and she reached for her water, avoiding my gaze. I swallowed hard. Mom used to call me every spring to talk about those roses, how they reminded her of Dad's patience. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes. Nathan's laugh cut through my thoughts. "Hey, Sarah, tell them about that client who sent you flowers?" Sarah grinned, launching into a story about a bouquet so big it barely fit through her office door. Everyone leaned in, even Uncle George, who'd just arrived with a bottle of bourbon. I tried to laugh along, but my chest felt tight, like I was breathing through a straw. I glanced at the stack of letters again, still peeking out from under Sarah's napkin. My words, my secrets, sitting there like evidence in a trial I didn't know was happening. "Emily," Hannah said suddenly, her voice sharp enough to make me flinch. "You ever think about coming back home, like for good?" The table quieted, and I felt every pair of eyes on me. Her question wasn't kind. It was a jab laced with something I couldn't pin down. "I mean, you're always so busy out there," she went on, her lips curling. "Must be nice living your big life." I forced a smile, my palms sweaty. "I'm here now, aren't I?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Missed you all." Hannah raised an eyebrow, and Nathan let out a low chuckle like I'd told a bad joke. Sarah sipped her wine, saying nothing, but her silence felt louder than words. I wanted to scream, to ask what I'd done to deserve this, but the words stuck in my throat. Uncle George cleared his throat, changing the subject to his fishing trip, and the table relaxed, as if my moment of scrutiny never happened. I pushed a piece of turkey around my plate, my appetite gone. Then Sarah stood her chair, scraping the floor, and my heart lurched. She clinked her glass, her smile tight but commanding. Everyone, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "We need to talk about something important." My pulse raced. This was it, the talk she'd texted about. I braced myself, expecting news about Mom's health or a family decision. "We voted," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Emily, you're not family anymore." The words hit like a slap, and the room spun. Cheers broke out, Nathan's voice the loudest. Hannah's clap sharp and gleeful. Mom's face was blank, her hands folded in her lap. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as Sarah sat back down, her expression unreadable. "What?" I managed my voice, barely a whisper. Nathan leaned forward, his smirk gone, replaced by something colder. "We had a meeting last month," he said. "You're out, Emily, for being selfish." Selfish. The word echoed in my head, a knife twisting deeper with every second. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to speak to defend me, but she just stared at her plate. Sarah's accusation about Dad's illness came next, her voice steady like she'd rehearsed it. "You left us when he was dying," she said, "chasing your career while we cleaned up the mess." My mind reeled. I'd spent weeks at the hospital holding Dad's hand, singing his favorite songs. Hadn't I doubt crept in, cold and heavy, as their faces blurred around me. My hands shook as I set my fork down, the clink against the plate, swallowed by the fading cheers. The dining room felt smaller, the walls pressing in as Sarah's words hung in the air. Selfish. The accusation burned a brand I didn't recognize. I looked around the table, searching for an ally, but Nathan's cold stare met mine, and Hannah's smirk grew sharper. Mom's eyes stayed fixed on her untouched, stuffing her silence louder than any shout. I opened my mouth, but Sarah cut me off, her voice slicing through the haze. "Let's be clear, Emily," she said, leaning forward, her wine glass glinting in the candlelight. "You've been checked out for years. Missing birthdays, dodging calls, leaving us to deal with everything." She ticked off my supposed crimes on her fingers, each one a jab to my chest. "You didn't even help with Mom's mortgage when she was drowning. And don't get me started on the gossip." "Gossip!" I choked out, my voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" My mind raced, trying to piece together what I'd done to earn this. I'd sent Mom money when I could, even when my own rent was late. I'd called, left voicemails, tried to stay connected despite the distance and my crumbling career. But Sarah's face was a mask of conviction, and the others nodded along like they'd rehearsed this. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with purpose. "You want specifics," he said, his tone mocking. "Here's one." He tapped the screen, and my own voice filled the room, tinny and distorted. "Sarah's always been so controlling," it said, acting like she's the only one who cares about Dad. The voicemail cut off, leaving a ringing silence. My stomach dropped. I remembered that call years ago, when I was exhausted and venting to Nathan after a fight with Sarah. I'd apologized the next day, but he'd kept it, weaponized it. "That's not fair," I said, my voice rising. "That was private and you know it." I turned to Nathan, pleading with my eyes, but he just shrugged like I was a stranger. "You said it, Emily," he replied. "Own it." Hannah let out a small laugh, and I felt heat flood my face, a mix of shame and fury. I wanted to grab that phone and smash it to erase the betrayal of my own words twisted against me. I tried to speak again to explain the context, but Uncle George raised a hand, his voice gruff. "Enough, Emily. We've heard enough." His words landed like a gavel, final and heavy. I froze my breath, catching. George, who used to sneak me extra pie at Christmas, now looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. Even Clara, my childhood friend sitting at the far end, wouldn't meet my gaze. She'd been invited as a guest, someone I thought I could trust, but her hands were knotted in her lap, her face blank. "Clara," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know me. Say something." She flinched, her eyes flicking to Sarah, then back to the table. "I don't know, Emily," she mumbled. Maybe they've got a point. Her words were a knife sharper than Sarah's accusations. Clara, who I'd called crying after my layoff, who knew how hard I'd tried to keep this family together, was siding with them. My chest burned the air too thick to breathe. I looked at the side table where a photo album lay open, its pages worn from years of flipping. My heart stopped. There, in a picture from our old lake house vacation, my face was scratched out, the ink jagged and deliberate. The sight hit me harder than Nathan's voicemail, a physical proof of their rejection. Who had done it? Sarah, Hannah. The question churned in my gut, feeding the anger bubbling inside me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but their united front felt like a fortress, and I was standing outside alone. The scratched-out photo seared into my mind, a wound I couldn't unsee. I forced my eyes back to Sarah, who was now standing again, her posture rigid like a judge about to deliver a verdict. The dining room was deathly quiet, the clatter of forks and glasses gone, replaced by the hum of the old heater struggling against the November chill. My throat burned, but I couldn't let myself cry, not here, not in front of them. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, trembling. What did I do to you? To any of you? I scanned the table, desperate for a crack in their resolve, but their faces were stone. Sarah's lips curled into a faint smile, not warm, but calculated. You really don't get it, do you? She said, folding her arms. You abandoned us when Dad needed you most. You were off chasing your dreams while we were here picking up the pieces. Her words hit like a fist. I shook my head, my memories of Dad's final months flooding back the sterile hospital smell, the beeping monitors, the way his hand felt frail in mine. I was there, I said, my voice breaking. I sat with him every night I could. I took leave from work. You know that. But Sarah's expression didn't waver. No, Emily, she said, her tone icy. You left for some job interview in Chicago the week he got worse. Don't rewrite history. Chicago. My mind spun, grasping for the memory. I'd gone to a conference once months before Dad's condition turned, but I'd rushed back when Mom called. Hadn't I doubt gnawed at me cold and relentless? I looked at Mom, her head bowed, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. Mom, I said, almost begging. You know I was there. Tell her. But she didn't look up, her silence a heavier betrayal than Sarah's words. Hannah spoke next, her voice sharp, cutting through the fog. And what about Dad's savings? She said, leaning forward, her eyes glittering with accusation. You think we don't know? I saw the bank records, Emily. You took his money and let Mom struggle. My breath caught the room tilting. What money? I said, my voice rising. I never touched Dad's accounts. I was paying Mom's bills out of my own pocket. I turned to Mom again, my heart pounding. Tell them I said. Please. Mom's lips parted, but no sound came. Sarah stepped in, her voice smooth, almost pitying. Don't drag Mom into this. She's been through enough because of you. The table murmured in agreement, a low hum of judgment. I felt like I was drowning, their words pulling me under. I wanted to demand proof to see these so-called bank records, but Sarah's purse caught my eye, half open on the chair beside her. Inside, I glimpsed the glint of a locket, the one Dad gave me when I graduated high school, its silver chain unmistakable. How did she have it? I'd kept it in my jewelry box, a piece of him I'd never let go. You have my locket, I said, pointing, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. Sarah's hand moved quickly, snapping the purse shut. Don't change the subject, she said, but her eyes flickered just for a moment. Nathan snorted, leaning back in his chair. Always playing the victim, huh? He said. That's why we're done with you. The words landed like a slap, and I felt the air leave my lungs. I turned to Uncle George, hoping his earlier interruption meant he might listen. George, I said, my voice raw. You knew, Dad. You know I'd never steal from him. But he shook his head, his jaw tight. Sarah mentioned something about a will, he said, his voice low, hesitant. Said Dad changed it because of you. Maybe there's truth to it. A will. My heart stopped. Dad's will had been settled years ago, split evenly among us. Or so I thought. The room felt like it was closing in every face, a stranger's every word, a new cut. The air in the dining room turned thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. George's words about Dad's will echoed in my head, each one a stone sinking in my gut. I stared at Sarah, her purse now clutched tight against her side, the locket hidden, but not forgotten. The table was a battlefield littered with cold plates and half-empty glasses, the warmth of Thanksgiving long gone. My family's faces blurred into a wall of judgment, their eyes pinning me like a bug under glass. I felt small, exposed, but something inside me refused to break. Sarah's voice cut through the silence, sharp and deliberate. You want to keep pretending, Emily, she said, stepping closer to the table's edge. Fine, Let's lay it all out. She reached into a drawer behind her and pulled out a small notebook, its cover worn and stained. My breath caught. It looked like one of Dad's, the kind he used to jot down grocery lists or sketch ideas for his woodworking projects. She flipped it open, her fingers steady, and began to read. "Emily's too proud to help," she said, her voice rising. "Emily doesn't care about us. Emily's always been selfish." Each line felt like a whip, and the room stirred murmurs of agreement rippling from Nathan to Hannah. Sarah's eyes never left mine as she turned the page. "This is what we wrote, all of us, at our family meeting last month. Everyone here had a say." She held up the notebook, showing a list of names, their handwriting jagged and unmistakable. Mom's was there, faint but clear, right below Nathan's. My heart pounded a drumbeat, drowning out the world. "You wrote this?" I said, my voice barely holding together. I looked at Mom, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. "You all sat down and decided I don't belong." The question hung there unanswered as Hannah nodded, her smirk gone, replaced by a strange intensity. "It wasn't easy," she said, almost defensive. "But we had to be honest." Nathan stood his chair, scraping the floor, and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It landed in front of me, creased and heavy with intent. "Go on," he said, his voice low, almost daring. "Read it." My finger shook as I unfolded it, the paper crackling in the quiet. There they were, signatures, one after another, inked in black and blue. Sarah, Nathan, Hannah, Mom, George, even Clara. My vision blurred, the names swimming like ghosts. This wasn't just a fight. This was a verdict, a ritual to erase me. Why, I whispered, my voice breaking. I looked at Clara, my oldest friend who'd laughed with me over coffee just last summer. "Clara, you signed this. You think I'm selfish." Her face crumpled and she looked away, her shoulders hunching. "Sarah told me things," she said, her voice small. "About how you hurt them." I didn't know what else to believe. Her words were a fresh cut, deeper than the rest. I'd trusted her with my fears, my hopes, and she'd turned them against me. I stood, my legs unsteady, and faced Sarah. "What things?" I said, my voice louder now, raw with anger. "What lies did you tell them?" Sarah's smile faltered just for a second, but she recovered, her chin lifting. "No lies," she said. "Just the truth about who you are." She set the notebook down, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was savoring this. Hannah piped up, her voice harsh. "You're the family leech, Emily," she said, spitting the word. "Taking what's ours and giving nothing back." The word leech sank into me, a poison spreading fast. I wanted to scream, to tear that notebook apart, to make them see me, the real me. But their faces were locked, their minds made up. I felt like I was falling, the ground gone beneath me, and no one was reaching out to catch me. My eyes landed on the notebook again, its pages open, Dad's familiar scrawl, a betrayal of its own. How had it come to this? How had my family turned a piece of him into a weapon against me? The notebook lay open on the table, Dad's handwriting, a cruel echo of better days. My legs felt like they might give out, but I stayed standing, gripping the back of my chair. The dining room was a cage, the flickering candles casting shadows that danced across Sarah's face. Her words, Hannah's venom and Clara's betrayal, churned inside me, a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to run, to shatter this moment, but my feet were rooted, my voice trapped in my throat. Sarah's gaze held mine, unrelenting, as she reached for a glass of water, sipping slowly, like she was drawing out my punishment. "You still don't see it, Emily?" she said, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "You've always acted like you're above us, like we're holding you back." She gestured to the others, her hand sweeping the table. "We're done carrying your weight. Done pretending you're part of this." Her words were a blade, but it was the room's response that broke me. Nathan clapped slowly, each sound a hammer to my chest. Hannah's eyes gleamed, her lips parting in a half-smile, as if my pain was her victory. Mom's hands were still her napkin now, a crumpled ball, her silence a wall I couldn't climb. I turned to George, my last hope, but his face was hard, his earlier doubt swallowed by Sarah's conviction, carrying my weight. I said, my voice hoarse, barely audible. "I've been sending money, calling, trying to hold us together. What more do you want?" My question cracked in the air, desperate, but Sarah didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice dropping low, intimate, like we were alone. "We wanted a sister," she said. "Not someone who shows up when it's convenient, then leaves us to clean up her mess." Nathan spoke up, his tone biting. "Like when you bailed on Dad's funeral planning," he said. "You were too busy, right? Left us to deal with the bills, the flowers, everything." My mouth opened, but no words came. I'd been there, hadn't I? I remembered the funeral home, the weight of choosing Dad's casket, the way I'd cried in the parking lot. But their faces told a different story, one where I was the villain, not the grieving daughter. Hannah stood now, her chair wobbling as she pointed at me. "And don't act innocent about the money," she said, her voice rising. "I heard you on the phone telling someone you'd handle Dad's accounts. You think we're stupid?" My head spun. A phone call, I'd never said anything like that. I'd been scrambling to pay my own bills, let alone touch Dad's savings. But the accusation landed, and the room seemed to tighten around me, their belief in my guilt a noose. I caught a glimpse of something on the counter. A small wooden box Dad used to keep for spare keys and loose change. It was open, and inside, I saw a folded note with my name on it in Dad's shaky script. My heart lurched. Had Sarah found it? Was it part of this? I wanted to grab it, to read his words, to feel him with me. But Hannah's voice snapped me back. "You're not fooling anyone," she said, stepping closer, her finger jabbing the air. "We know who you are." Clara's voice came next, soft but piercing. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, finally looking at me, her eyes wet but cold. "But Sarah showed me texts, Emily." "You talking about us, laughing at us?" "Texts." My mind blanked. I'd never mocked them, never sent anything like that. But Clara's tears, real or not, sealed it. The room closed in their voices, a chorus of condemnation. I felt my heart splinter, the pieces too sharp to hold. There was no way out, no one to hear me, just this endless, suffocating truth they'd built without me. The weight of their accusations pressed against my chest, each word a stone I couldn't push away. The dining room was a blur of candlelight and cold faces, Hannah's finger still hovering in the air, Clara's tear-streaked cheeks glinting in the dim glow. That wooden box on the counter with Dad's note inside felt like the only piece of him left in this room. My eyes stung, but I swallowed the tears. I was done begging, done letting their version of me win. Something shifted inside, a spark of defiance flickering through the haze. I took a shaky breath and straightened my hands, steadying on the table. "Enough?" I said, my voice low but firm, cutting through Hannah's lingering sneer. The room stilled, their eyes snapping to me, surprised, like they hadn't expected me to speak. Sarah's brow furrowed, her purse still clutched tight, but I didn't look at her. I looked at the box, at Dad's note, and felt his strength in me, quiet but unyielding. "You want to talk truth?" I said, my gaze sweeping the table, landing on each of them. Then, let's talk about Dad's will, the one you're all so sure I ruined. George shifted in his seat, his earlier mention of the will hanging between us. Sarah's lips parted, but I didn't give her a chance. "I've been digging," I said, my voice growing steadier. "With a friend, Lucas. He's a lawyer and he found things you didn't think I'd notice." Nathan scoffed, leaning back, but his smirk faltered just for a second. I kept going, my heart pounding, but my words clear. "Bank records, Sarah. Transfers from Dad's account after he died. Not to Mom, not to us, but to you." The room froze, the air so thick I could feel it. Sarah's face paled, her hand tightening on her purse. "That's a lie," she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around a USB drive I'd brought, not expecting to need it. Lucas had sent it last week after weeks of combing through records I'd requested out of desperation. "This has proof," I said, holding it up, the small black stick glinting in the light. "Calls you made, Sarah. To Mom, to the bank. You told Mom to stay quiet, didn't you? Told her I was the problem?" Mom's head jerked up, her eyes wide, but she didn't speak. Her silence was a wound, but I pushed through it. Hannah's jaw dropped, her bravado crumbling. "You're making this up," she said, but her voice was thin, uncertain. I shook my head, my eyes locked on Sarah. "Lucas is on his way," I said, bluffing just enough to keep them off balance. "He's got the statements, the dates, everything. You want to keep calling me a leech? Let's see who's been taking from this family." George cleared his throat, his voice gruff but shaken. "Sarah, is this true?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Did you hide the will?" Sarah's mouth opened, then closed, her composure slipping like sand through her fingers. I saw it then, the crack in her armor, the fear she'd been hiding. It fueled me, not with triumph, but with clarity. I wasn't the villain here, and I wouldn't let them rewrite me anymore. I set the USB drive on the table, its weight heavier than it should have been. "You voted me out," I said, my voice steady now, each word a step toward reclaiming myself. "But you don't get to erase me. Not with lies. Not with Dad's memory." The room was silent, their faces a mix of shock and doubt, and for the first time, I felt the ground beneath me solid mine. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The USB drive sat on the table, a small black sentinel in the flickering candlelight. Sarah's face was a mask of barely contained panic, her fingers white-knuckled around her purse. The dining room, once loud with accusations, was now a held breath, every eye darting between me and her. My words, my truth had shifted something, but the room wasn't ready to exhale. Neither was I. I stepped forward, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "I'm done letting you paint me as the problem," I said, looking straight at Sarah. "You want to talk about family? Let's talk about what I did for this one." I turned to Mom, her eyes wide, her hands still clutching that crumpled napkin. "I paid your hospital bills, Mom, when the insurance wouldn't. I sent checks for your meds even when I was eating ramen to make rent." Mom's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. I kept going, my gaze shifting to Hannah. "And you, Hannah, I drove you to rehab, sat with you through withdrawals because I believed in you." Hannah's face crumpled, her hands covering her mouth, a sob breaking free. Nathan shifted his jaw tight, but he didn't interrupt. The room was mine now, not Sarah's, and I wasn't wasting it. I turned to Clara, my voice softening but firm. "Clara, you know me. You know I'd never laugh at this family. Those texts Sarah showed you? Ask yourself why she needed to twist my words." Clara's eyes met mine, wet and searching, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of regret. I didn't wait for her to answer. I faced the whole table, my chest rising with a strength I hadn't felt in years. I've spent years trying to prove I belong here, I said, my voice clear, unwavering. I missed sleep, missed chances, poured everything into keeping us together. And you took that and called it nothing. My eyes landed on Sarah's purse, the locket's betrayal still raw. I stepped closer, my hand steady as I reached for it. She flinched, pulling back, but I was faster. I opened the clasp, the silver locket glinting as I held it up. This was mine, I said, my voice quiet but cutting. Dad gave it to me, told me to keep it close. You took it, Sarah, like you took his memory and made it yours. I opened the locket, revealing the tiny photo inside me and Dad at my high school graduation, his smile proud. You don't get to take this too. I set it down beside the USB drive, my fingers lingering on the cool metal feeling Dad's love in its weight. Sarah's voice broke the silence, shrill and defensive. You're twisting everything she said, standing her chair scraping. That's not how it happened. But her words lacked conviction, and George's eyes narrowed his earlier question about the will still unanswered. Hannah was crying now, her shoulders shaking, and I felt a pang of sorrow for her, but I couldn't stop. I looked at Mom, my voice softer, but no less firm. I love you, I said, but I'm done begging for your trust. I turned to the others, my gaze steady. I'm done begging any of you. If you want to believe her lies, that's your choice. But I know who I am. I stepped back, my hands falling to my sides, the room so quiet I could hear the wind rattling the windows. Hannah's voice came small and broken. I lied, she said, her eyes on the floor. About the money. Sarah told me to say it said it'd make things right. The admission hung there, a crack in the wall they'd built against me. Sarah's face went white, her mouth opening, but no words came. I didn't look at her. I looked at the locket at Dad's photo and felt a quiet resolve settle in my bones. I wasn't invisible anymore. Hannah's confession hung in the air, a fragile thread snapping under the weight of the silence. The dining room felt frozen. The candles burned low, their wax pooling on the tablecloth. The locket lay beside the USB drive, Dad's photo, a quiet witness to the chaos I'd unleashed. Sarah stood rigid, her face drained of color. Her hands empty now, the purse abandoned on her chair. My words, my truth had shifted something, but the room wasn't ready to exhale. Neither was I. George broke the stillness, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. Sarah, answer me, he said, leaning forward, his eyes sharp. What's this about the will? You said Emily messed with it. Now I'm hearing you hid it. His question was a blade, and Sarah flinched, her lips parting, but no sound coming. She glanced at Nathan, then Mom, searching for an anchor, but Nathan's face was closed off, his arms crossed tight. I stood still, my hands at my sides, the fire in my chest cooling into something heavier, like wet ash. I'd expected shouting denials, maybe even tears, but this quiet was worse. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks, when everyone knows the ground's about to shift. Hannah's sobs had softened, her hands now gripping the edge of the table, her face blotchy and raw. Clara was staring at me, her expression unreadable, a mix of guilt and something I couldn't name. Sarah finally spoke, her voice thin, almost brittle. You're all buying this, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. She's lying. That USB drive's probably fake, just like her stories. But her words lacked the venom they'd had before, and George wasn't swayed. He stood his chair creaking and pointed at her. You've got a lot to explain, girl, he said. I trusted you. We all did. Mom's voice came next, soft and trembling, the first she'd spoken since Sarah's announcement. Sarah, Is it true? She asked, her hands unfolding the napkin falling to her lap. Did you take the money? Did you lie about Emily? Her words were a plea, not an accusation, and they cut deeper than George's. Sarah's eyes widened, her breath hitching, but she didn't answer. Mom's question hung there, unanswered, a wound no one could stitch. I wanted to feel vindicated, to let their doubt in Sarah lift me, but all I felt was hollow. The family I'd fought for, the one I'd poured my heart into, was cracking apart, and I wasn't sure I could save it. I glanced at the locket, Dad's smile steady in the chaos, and felt a pang of loss, not just for him, but for the us we used to be. I'd come here hoping to mend things, and now the table was a graveyard of what we'd been. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair tipping back, nearly falling. "This is bullshit," he said, his voice loud, jagged. "You're all turning on her because of Emily's sob story." He grabbed his coat from the back of his chair, his movements sharp, and stormed toward the door. "I'm out." The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. No one moved. No one called him back. His absence was a weight proof that my stand had cost something I couldn't measure. George turned to me, his face softer now, but still guarded. "You got more to say, Emily?" he asked, his voice low. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. The truth was out, or part of it, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a home I'd built with my own hands. Sarah's eyes met mine, not with anger, but with something new, something raw, and I realized she was scared. The room held its breath, waiting for what came next, and I stood there, caught in the silence, unsure if I'd broken free or just broken everything. The echo of Nathan's slammed door lingered, a sharp note in the dining room's heavy quiet. I stood, my hands loose at my sides, the locket and USB drive still on the table, small but immovable truths. Sarah's fear flickered in her eyes, a crack in the armor she'd worn all night. The candles were nearly gone, their flames low, casting long shadows across the untouched plates of pie and stuffing. My chest felt empty, like I'd poured everything out and had nothing left to give. Hannah's sobs had stopped, her hands now folded in her lap, her face blotchy and raw. She looked at me not with anger, but with something softer, like regret. "I didn't mean it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to be part of something." Her words hit me not as an apology, but as a mirror, showing me how far we'd all fallen. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with a sorrow I couldn't name. Clara stood, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was stepping into a storm. "Emily," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. I should have asked you, not her." She glanced at Sarah, then back at me, her eyes pleading for something I wasn't ready to offer. I wanted to forgive her, to pull her into the hug we'd shared 100 times. But the sting of her signature on that paper held me back. I gave her a small nod, all I could manage. Mom's chair creaked as she shifted her hands, smoothing the tablecloth, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. "I didn't want this," she said, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "I thought I was protecting us." She looked at Sarah, then me, her eyes wet but steady. I was wrong. Her admission was a pebble dropped in still water ripples, spreading but not breaking the surface. I wanted to reach for her to bridge the gap, but my feet stayed planted, rooted by years of silence. Sarah's voice came sharp but unsteady, like a glass about to crack. "You're all acting like I'm the villain," she said, her hands gripping the table's edge. "I did what I had to. For Mom, for us." She looked at George, then Hannah, desperate for an ally, but George's face was stone, and Hannah wouldn't meet her eyes. "You don't know what it was like," Sarah went on, her voice rising. Emily was never here. I carried it all. Her words were meant to wound, but they fell flat, hollow, in the wake of Hannah's confession and Mom's quiet truth. I looked at her, my sister, the one I'd once shared secrets with under the stars, and saw a stranger. You carried what you chose, I said, my voice calm, almost cold. But you didn't carry me. The words landed soft, but they cut, and Sarah's shoulders slumped, her defiance draining away. George cleared his throat, his voice gruff but kind. We need to sort this out, he said, looking at me. The will, the money, all of it. I'll help Emily if you want. His offer was a lifeline, but it felt distant, like a rope thrown across a chasm I wasn't sure I could cross. I knotted my lips tight and glanced at the table where the pie I'd baked sat untouched, a reminder of the hope I'd walked in with. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, the air heavy with what we'd lost. I wanted to say more to fix it all, but the weight of their eyes, their half-spoken truths, pressed me down. I looked at Mom, at Hannah, at Clara, and felt the ache of a family I'd never fully have again. My heart was a quiet bruise, tender and raw, and as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of our Thanksgiving, I wondered if truth was worth this cost. A week had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and my apartment felt like a sanctuary, small, but mine. The morning light slipped through the blinds, painting soft stripes across my hardwood floor. I sat cross-legged on the couch, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands, the steam curling up like a quiet promise. A jazz record spun on my old turntable, its notes low and steady, filling the space where my thoughts used to race. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from silence. I was leaning into it. I opened my journal, its pages already half filled with scribbled thoughts from sleepless nights. My pen hovered, then moved, the words coming slow but true. I wrote about Dad, not the hospital days or the fights, but the way he'd hum off key while fixing the porch swing, how he'd slip me a 20 for gas when I was broke. I wrote about the dinner, not the accusations, but the moment I stood up, the way my voice didn't shake. The act of writing felt like untangling a knot, each sentence loosening something I'd carried too long. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a text from Sarah flashing across the screen. Stop spreading lies. It read, her words sharp, even in pixels. I stared at it, waiting for the old ache to flare, but it didn't. I set the phone down, screen dark, and didn't reply. Blocking her number wasn't about anger. It was about choosing my own air to breathe. I turned back to my journal, writing now about the girl I used to be, the one who'd apologize for existing, who'd beg for a seat at a table that never had room. The record switched tracks, a saxophone weaving through the quiet. I stood, stretching, and walked to my desk, where a small wooden frame now sat. Inside was a photo of Dad and me, not the hospital one, but a candid from a summer barbecue, my hair messy, his laugh caught mid-burst. I'd found it in a box of old keepsakes tucked away like a secret I'd forgotten. I traced the frame's edge, feeling the grain under my fingertips, and smiled. He'd seen me even when I couldn't see myself. I picked up my phone again, this time to call Lucas. His voice came through warm, steady like always. Hey, you holding up? He asked. I leaned against the counter, the kitchen tiles cool under my bare feet. Better than I thought, I said, and meant it. I thanked him for the bank records, for showing up that night with proof that turned the tide. You didn't need me, he said, a grin in his voice. You had it handled. I laughed soft, and it felt good, like a muscle I was learning to use again. We talked about Hannah, how she'd called him yesterday asking about therapy programs. She's trying, he said. Said she wants to make things right. I nodded, though he couldn't see, picturing Hannah's tear-streaked face at the dinner. I didn't know if we'd ever be close, but her effort mattered a small light in the dark. I hung up the jazz still playing and sat back on the couch, my journal open again. I wrote one last line. I'm enough. The words looked simple, but they carried a weight I was finally ready to hold. The morning stretched on quiet but full, and I let it wrap around me. The tea had cooled, but I sipped it anyway, tasting the faint sweetness. Outside, a bird chirped sharp against the city's hum, and I felt my shoulders loosen, my breath slow. I wasn't whole yet, but I was here in this moment, and that was a start. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a golden haze through my apartment window. I set my journal aside, its pages now heavy with truths I'd finally let breathe. The jazz record had ended, leaving a soft hum in the air, like the world was pausing with me. I stood, my bare feet quiet on the floor, and walked to the kitchen where a small tin of coffee sat on the counter. I scooped some into a filter, the rich smell grounding me, and started the pot, the gurgle a steady rhythm. My phone lit up again, this time with a call from Mom. I hesitated, my thumb hovering, then answered. Emily. She said, her voice fragile but warm. Can we talk? I leaned against the counter, the tiles still cool, and nodded, though she couldn't see. Sure, I said, my tone even open. She apologized, her words halting for believing Sarah for staying silent. I was scared, she said, of losing you all. I listened, my heart softening, but not rushing to fix it. Let's take it slow, I said, and she agreed, her sigh a small bridge between us. I hung up and poured the coffee, the mug warm in my hands. I thought of Mom's rose bushes, how they'd bloomed despite neglect, and felt a quiet hope. Not for the family we'd been, but for something new, built on truth, not obligation. I carried the mug to my desk, where the photo of Dad and me stood, his laugh frozen in time. I didn't need to touch it now. His love was in me, steady as my pulse. Later, I met Hannah at a corner cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and too loud music. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a latte, her eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. I'm starting over, she said, her voice steady. New job, therapy, the works. She talked about her plans, her voice bright with a courage I hadn't known she had. I smiled, not the forced kind, but real. You're doing good, I said, and meant it. We didn't hug, didn't need to. The space between us was enough clean and honest. Back home, I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. I'd started a blog last night, a whim, born of sleepless hours, about family betrayal and finding your way back. The first post was raw, just a few lines about losing people you love and learning to love yourself. I added a new entry, my words slow, deliberate. I wrote about forgiveness, not the loud kind, but the quiet choice to let go. It wasn't for them. It was for me. The evening settled in the city's hum, a distant pulse. I stood at my window, coffee gone cold, and watched the streetlights flicker on. A text from Nathan popped up short and stiff. I'm with Sarah, but I'm thinking. I didn't reply, didn't need to. I let the phone rest, my reflection faint in the glass. I wasn't the girl who'd walked into that dinner carrying a pie and a plea. I was someone new, not whole, but growing, and that was enough. I closed my eyes, the world soft and still, and let myself be. Spring had crept into my corner of Ohio by April 2025, the air soft with the scent of blooming lilacs. My apartment was brighter now, not just from the longer days, but from the way I'd made it mine. A potted fern sat on the windowsill, its leaves curling toward the light. a quiet companion I watered each morning. I'd started running again, not fast, just steady loops through the park, my sneakers slapping the path as the world woke up. It wasn't about fitness, it was about feeling my own breath, knowing I could keep going. I sat at my kitchen table, a notebook open, its pages filled with ideas for my blog. What started as a late-night impulse had grown readers sending messages from places I'd never been, their stories of fractured families mirroring mine. I read one this morning from a woman in Texas about her brother cutting her off over a misunderstanding. "Your words made me feel seen," she wrote. I traced her name with my finger, a stranger's pain twinning with my own, and felt a warmth I hadn't known I needed. My mornings had a rhythm now. I'd brew coffee, the kind with a hint of cinnamon, and sit by the window watching dog walkers and delivery trucks pass below. I'd write a few lines, not for the blog, but for me. Thoughts about trust, about how it's less about others and more about believing in your own heart. I wasn't angry anymore, not at Sarah, not at Nathan. Their absence was a space I'd learned to fill not with noise, but with quiet choices, like buying that fern or signing up for a pottery class next month. I'd visited Dad's grave last week, a small cemetery tucked behind a church, the grass damp from spring rain. I brought daisies, their white petals bright against the stone, and sat there, not crying, just talking. I told him about the blog, about running, about how I was finding my way. The wind carried my words, and I felt him listening, his presence, a steady hum in my chest. I left a single daisy behind its stem tucked into the earth, and walked away lighter, my steps sure. Mom and I had lunch yesterday at a diner with cracked vinyl booths and the best milkshakes in town. She looked older, her hands thinner, but her smile was real. We talked about small things, her new knitting project, my latest blog post. She didn't mention Sarah, and I didn't ask. We were building something new, fragile but honest, and for now, that was enough. As we split the bill, she reached for my hand, her touch brief but warm, and I squeezed back a silent promise to keep trying. Hannah had texted me this morning a photo of her new apartment, a tiny studio with a view of a maple tree. "First night here," she wrote. "Feels like a win." I smiled, typing back a quick, "proud of you." Her journey wasn't mine, but I rooted for her the way I was learning to root for myself. Clara had called last week, her voice bright, asking to meet for coffee. I said yes, not out of duty, but because I wanted to, because forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but making room for something better. I closed my notebook, the afternoon light slanting across the table. The fern caught my eye, its green vivid against the sill, and I stood to water it, the can's soft pour a gentle sound. I wasn't fixed, not entirely, but I was growing like that plant reaching for light I'd once thought was out of reach. I set the can down, my hands steady, and let the quiet settle, a moment of peace before the world asked for more. The days grew longer, and my apartment became a canvas of small changes. A woven rug now warmed the living room, its blues and golds a choice I made without second-guessing. I'd taken to baking bread on weekends, the kneading a meditation, the yeasty smell filling the space with something alive. Each loaf imperfect, but mine was a reminder that I could create, not just rebuild. I'd slice it warm, spread butter slow, and eat in the quiet, savoring the simple act of feeding myself. My blog had become a lifeline, not just for me, but for strangers who found it. I'd check comments at night, curled up with a blanket, reading stories of lost siblings, silent parents, choices that broke and mended hearts. A man from Oregon wrote about forgiving his mother after years of distance. A teenager shared how she stood up to her family's expectations. Their words wove into mine a tapestry of survival, and I felt less alone, like I was part of something bigger than my own pain. I'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching a writing workshop for kids. Their stories, wild and unfiltered, reminded me of the girl I'd been scribbling dreams in a notebook, unafraid of being seen. One boy, shy with a stutter, handed me a poem about his dog, his pride brighter than the fluorescent lights. I praised him, my voice steady, and saw Dad in his grin the way he'd always cheered my smallest wins. Teaching wasn't fixing me, but it was planting seeds for them and for me. Lucas had become a friend, our talks over coffee turning into walks through the park. His laugh easy, his questions kind. He didn't push, didn't need me to be anything but myself. Last week, he joined my workshop reading a kid's story with a goofy voice that made us all laugh. I caught his eye after a warmth passing between us, not loud, but real. I wasn't ready for more, not yet, but I was open, and that felt like a victory. Sarah hadn't reached out since her last text, and I didn't expect her to. Nathan sent a message yesterday, short but softer. "Maybe we can talk sometime," I replied. "When you're ready," and left it there. I didn't need their approval anymore, didn't need to prove I was enough. Mom and I were finding our way, meeting for walks now, her stories of Dad mingling with mine. Hannah's texts came weekly updates on her job, her life, each one a step towards something better. I stood in my kitchen one evening, the sky bruised with dusk, and opened a drawer. Inside was a new journal, its pages blank, waiting. I didn't write yet, just held it, feeling its weight. I'd learned something through all this, not a slogan, but a truth carved deep. Family isn't just who you're born to, but who stays, who sees you when you're cracked and still calls you whole. I'd lost people, but I'd found others, and most of all, I'd found me. That was the gift of letting go, not of them, but of the need to be theirs. I set the journal down, my breath slow, and looked out at the city lights blinking to life. The world was messy, but it was mine to walk through one quiet step at a time. What's the hardest truth you've had to face to find yourself? Share it below. Your story might light someone else's way. If this moved, you give it a like, subscribe for more journeys like mine, and pass it on to someone who needs it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to healing, to growing to you.